In December 2015, in a quiet Connecticut town where violent crime was rare, a woman was found shot to death in the basement of her own home. Her name was Connie Dabate. She was a wife, a mother of 2 young boys, and someone who had followed a normal routine that morning. By the afternoon, she was gone. Her husband, Richard Dabate, was the one who called emergency services. He told the police a frightening story. According to him, a masked intruder broke into their home, forced Connie into the basement, and shot her during a struggle. He said he tried to fight back and was shot as well. It sounded chaotic, terrifying, the kind of story that explains everything and nothing at the same time. At first, there was no obvious reason to doubt him. But this case did not fall apart because of a witness who spoke up or a suspect who slipped during questioning. It unraveled because of something far quieter, something ordinary. A fitness tracker wrapped around Connie's wrist continued doing its job after her husband said she was already dead. That detail changed everything. This is what makes this case so different from most true crime stories. There was no dramatic surveillance footage and no secret recording device. Just a small piece of everyday technology that tracked steps and movement without emotion or bias. While one person tried to control the narrative, the data remained steady and honest. Investigators were left with a simple but devastating question. If Connie was already dead when Richard claimed she was, why did her fitness tracker show her still walking through the house? This is the story of how a carefully staged version of events collapsed under the weight of digital truth. A story where a device meant to count steps became a silent witness, and where a lie, no matter how rehearsed, could not outrun the truth. Before the tragedy that would shake a quiet Connecticut town, Connie Dabate and Richard Dabate seemed like a picture-perfect couple. To friends, neighbors, and co-workers, they looked like the kind of family you'd see on a postcard. Married for over a decade, 2 young sons, and a comfortable home at the end of a leafy suburban drive in Ellington. They weren't flashy people, just a working family living a busy, everyday life. Connie was 39 when she died, and she had built a successful career in pharmaceutical sales. People who knew her described her as lively and energetic, someone fully invested in her work and her family. She graduated high school locally and went on to earn a degree from the University of Connecticut, later working for major companies before settling into her role at Reckitt Benckiser. Connie threw herself into life with a kind of quiet enthusiasm. She cared about fitness, kept a structured routine, and was deeply involved in her children's activities. Her presence in the community was warm, steady, and familiar. Richard, in contrast, worked in a technical field, managing computer networks and presenting himself as calm, rational, and capable. From the outside, he fit the mold of a devoted father and husband. Neighbors never suspected anything out of the ordinary in his behavior, but beneath the surface, not everything was as serene as it looked. They were married in the early 2000s, and by 2015 had 2 sons who were still in elementary school. Their home at 7 Birchview Drive was a 4-bedroom colonial that matched its quiet surroundings. The neighborhood was the kind where people left doors unlocked and waved to one another in the morning. It's the kind of place where you assume nothing bad ever happens. Yet despite this facade, the Dabates' marriage had begun to show cracks. What appeared on the outside as stability hid arguments, financial disagreements, and secrets neither family nor neighbors fully understood. Around the time of Connie's death, police later found evidence of an extramarital affair Richard was involved in, including communications with a woman who was pregnant with his child. Prosecutors would go on to argue that this relationship, and the pressure it brought into the marriage, played a significant role in the events that followed. All of this, the successful career, the boys' school routine, the seemingly solid household, and the dark tensions simmering beneath the surface, set the stage for a tragedy that would not only shake their community, but would change how police think about digital evidence in violent crime investigations. In the months leading up to Connie Dabate's death, the marriage she shared with Richard was no longer steady. To the outside world, nothing looked obviously wrong, but behind closed doors, the relationship was under strain. Investigators later revealed that Connie had begun documenting her thoughts about the marriage. She wrote notes explaining why she was considering divorce. These weren't emotional outbursts or momentary frustrations. They were clear, deliberate reflections, suggesting she had reached a point where she was thinking seriously about ending the relationship. At the same time, Richard was making his own quiet moves. Records showed that he had met with a divorce attorney months before the murder. That detail mattered in court because it showed that both sides of the marriage were contemplating separation, even if neither had publicly acknowledged it yet. Then came the secret that would change everything. Richard was involved in an extramarital affair, one that went far beyond emotional distance or private messages. The woman he was seeing became pregnant. Prosecutors later described this as a turning point. What might have stayed hidden suddenly carried consequences that could no longer be contained. As pressure built, so did the risks. Divorce would not only expose the affair, it would bring financial fallout, custody issues, and public scrutiny. The image of stability Richard presented to his family, co-workers, and community was becoming harder to maintain. After Connie's death, investigators pointed to another troubling detail. Richard attempted to access Connie's life insurance not long after she was killed. In court, prosecutors argued that this behavior did not reflect shock or confusion, but calculation. This context matters because it reframes everything that comes next. The murder did not happen inside a peaceful marriage disrupted by a random intruder. It occurred within a relationship already under pressure, marked by secrecy, fear of exposure, and a future that was rapidly closing in. On the morning of December 23, 2015, Connie Dabate left her home expecting an ordinary day. She headed to the gym, part of a routine she followed regularly. The class she planned to attend was canceled, so she returned home earlier than expected, just after 9 in the morning. Inside the house, there were no signs of trouble. Connie moved through her normal habits. She spoke briefly with her mother on the phone. She sent a few messages. She walked around the house. Her fitness tracker recorded steady movement, the kind you would expect from someone going about their morning, not someone under immediate threat. At some point after she returned, Richard Dabate was also at the house, despite later claiming he had already left. Digital activity inside the home showed use of devices and interactions with the security system during the same window Connie was moving around. Nothing about the house suggested panic or a struggle at that moment. What happened next unfolded inside a narrow window of time. Connie was shot in the basement of her home. The exact sequence would become the most critical question in the case, because it was here that Richard's account and the physical evidence stopped aligning. The movement recorded by Connie's fitness tracker continued well beyond the moment Richard would later say she was already dead. After the shooting, the scene changed quickly. The security alarm was triggered. Richard restrained himself and placed a call for help. When emergency services arrived, they found him wounded and tied to a chair, claiming a masked intruder had broken into the house, shot his wife, and fled. Connie was found in the basement with multiple gunshot wounds. The house showed no forced entry. Nothing had been taken. The scene looked violent, but controlled. From the outside, it appeared like a sudden home invasion, but even in those first moments, small details didn't quite fit. By the end of the morning, Connie Dabate was dead. Her children were still at school, and a story had been told. It sounded convincing enough to explain what happened. It just wasn't true. Richard Dabate didn't hesitate when police asked what happened. He spoke with confidence, as if the story had already been rehearsed in his mind. He said it started with the home alarm. While he was out after dropping the children at school, he claimed he received an alert that something was wrong at the house. Concerned, he turned around and drove back. When he entered, he said the house felt off, quiet, but not normal. That's when, according to Richard, a masked intruder confronted him. He described the man as large, dressed in dark or camouflage clothing, with his face covered. The intruder, he said, moved fast and seemed to know exactly what he was doing. Richard claimed the man overpowered him almost immediately, using force and what he described as pressure points to control him. The story then escalated. Richard said he was zip-tied to a folding chair. He claimed the intruder stabbed him repeatedly with a box cutter and burned his ankle with a blowtorch, inflicting pain slowly, deliberately. In his telling, this wasn't a quick robbery, it was torture. Richard said he eventually managed to fight back. He claimed he grabbed the blowtorch and shoved it toward the intruder's face, burning him badly enough that the man fled the house. Then came the most devastating part of the story. Richard said Connie arrived home while he was restrained. According to him, the intruder went after her, forced her into the basement, and shot her. Richard claimed he could hear what was happening, but couldn't reach her in time. When first responders arrived, they found Richard injured, restrained, and lying on the kitchen floor near a folding chair. He repeated the same account. A masked intruder broke in, attacked him, killed his wife, and escaped. It was a story filled with fear, violence, and just enough detail to sound convincing. A clear villain, a helpless victim, a husband who survived by chance. At least, that was the version Richard gave. What investigators would soon discover is that the story only worked if you listened to it alone. The moment they compared it to the timeline inside the house, it began to fall apart. When officers arrived at the Dabate home, the scene already felt unusual. Richard Dabate was inside, injured and restrained, claiming a masked intruder had attacked him, shot his wife in the basement, and fled. Police secured the house and checked the obvious first. Doors and windows were intact. Nothing had been forced open. There was no broken glass, no damaged locks, no clear sign that anyone had broken in. For a violent home invasion, the house looked almost untouched. Inside, things felt controlled. Furniture was mostly in place. Valuables were still there. It didn't look like a burglary or a panicked struggle moving through the house. It looked staged. Officers also paid attention to Richard's injuries. He had cuts and a gunshot wound, but the wounds didn't clearly match the violent fight he described. They were real, but oddly placed, and not consistent with the level of chaos in his story. In the basement, Connie Dabate was found with multiple gunshot wounds. The location raised immediate questions. Why the basement? Why was there so little disturbance leading to it? As police documented the scene, doubts began forming quietly. No forced entry, no sign of escape, no scent trail when dogs were brought in, and a story that seemed heavy on detail, but light on physical support. At that point, no one accused Richard of anything. But the home invasion story no longer felt solid. From the very first response, something about the scene didn't line up, and investigators knew they would have to look closer. What finally broke Richard Dabate's story wasn't something he said or did in front of police. It was the quiet digital trail left behind inside the house. The most damaging piece came from Connie's Fitbit. According to Richard, she was attacked almost as soon as she got home. There should have been little or no movement after that point. But the data showed something very different. Connie continued walking around the house for a significant amount of time after Richard claimed she was already dead. Not a few steps, not a brief movement. Steady, normal activity that suggested she was alive, calm, and moving freely. That alone was a serious problem for his timeline. Then investigators looked at the home alarm system. The logs showed the system being armed and disarmed multiple times that morning. The pattern didn't match a break-in or a hurried escape. It showed someone inside the house, moving normally, interacting with the system in a controlled way. Again, it didn't line up with Richard's version of events. Phones and tablets filled in the rest. Messages and activity confirmed Richard was communicating secretly with another woman. Some of that activity happened during the same window he said he wasn't even home. The digital trail suggested awareness and control, not confusion or panic. Each piece of evidence on its own raised questions. Together, they destroyed the story completely. The devices didn't rely on memory. They didn't exaggerate. They simply recorded what happened. From that moment on, the case stopped being about what Richard claimed occurred. It became about what the data inside that house quietly proved. By the time investigators finished reviewing the evidence, the case had crossed a line. This was no longer a confusing home invasion with unanswered questions. The timeline had been rebuilt, and it pointed in one direction. Detectives laid out the morning using digital records as fixed points. Connie returned home and moved through the house normally. Her Fitbit showed steady activity well after the time Richard claimed she had been shot. The alarm system logs showed repeated activity inside the house that didn't resemble a break-in or a rushed escape. Phone and tablet data placed Richard in the home during a window when he said he wasn't there. When those pieces were aligned, they didn't overlap with Richard's version at all. At the same time, the physical scene began to make sense in a different way. The restraints, the folding chair, and Richard's injuries no longer looked like the aftermath of an attack. They looked added. The house showed no forced entry. Nothing was stolen. There was no clear path an intruder could have used to get in or out. Even the extreme details Richard described, the blowtorch, the zip ties, the torture started to feel excessive, as if they were meant to convince rather than reflect reality. Investigators concluded that the home invasion had been staged after the shooting. Connie was alive longer than Richard said. She was not ambushed by a stranger. She was led to the basement, shot, and only then was the scene arranged to tell a different story. Once that conclusion was reached, the investigation moved quickly. Richard Dabate was arrested and charged with Connie's murder, along with additional counts related to tampering with evidence and lying to police. The case was no longer about piecing together possibilities. It was about preparing to prove, in court, that the story Richard told from the beginning had been false. What made this investigation stand out wasn't just the technology. It was how consistently the evidence spoke. Every device told the same story. Sentencing, the focus shifted to what had been lost. Connie Dabate was remembered as a mother, a wife, a person whose life ended during what should have been an ordinary morning. Her 2 sons would grow up without her. The judge sentenced Richard Dabate to 65 years in prison. It wasn't just punishment for the crime. It was a response to the planning, the deception, and the attempt to hide the truth behind a fake home invasion. As Richard was led out of the courtroom, the case closed in law. But its impact didn't end there. Because this wasn't just a murder case. Today, the case is remembered not just for what happened, but for how it was proven. A quiet house, ordinary devices, a fitness tracker doing what it was designed to do. Recording the truth when no one else was watching. Connie Dabate didn't have a voice in that basement, but her movements, her steps, and the digital trail she left behind spoke for her when it mattered most. And that's where this story ends. Thank you for staying with me to the end of this case. If you want more true crime stories like these, stories where the truth slowly comes into focus, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. That way, you'll be the first to know when the next story drops. Until then, stay curious and stay safe.